Greetings and welcome to Dogs, our beloved companions. I know that you showed up tonight because you likely have a canine companion that you live with, or you've lived with dogs in the past, or you just genuinely love dogs and you love the great companionship, a lot of the therapy that they provide for a great number of people, the protection, the location. I mean, dogs are just some of the most amazing, comforting creatures on the planet that aren't exactly like human beings, but they sure are very full of love, guidance, and protection. So this is a presentation that I'm giving tonight just to touch over a little bit about dogs, and we're going to go ahead and start now. So thank you for joining me tonight. I want to just let you know that you can contact me or check out some of my work at naturallywithkaren.com. I have upcoming books, including one about dogs, and I do consultations for dogs and people with dogs. They run $60, and we do them virtually through Skype or through a Facebook video, as well as through the phone or in person in Minnesota. Canines, dogs, whether you know them by any name, most of all, our beloved companions, we are told, descend from the wolf. And mankind has now created many breeds, sizes, types, fur types, and abilities by selectively breeding. By taking some of the wolf dogs that came by the campfire and that actually became some of our first baby wipes. They actually licked the behinds of some of our toddlers and young children long before we ran to the store and filled up our landfill with things called Pampers and disposable diapers that wick away urine and feces from our small ones, our babies and toddlers, with the use of harmful chemicals next to their genitals. So dogs have always been our faithful companions. They have provided us protection and loyalty and alerted us to people nearby when we were sleeping. And we have all different kinds, from the small, super tiny teacup Chihuahua all the way up to the huge Great Danes and even larger breeds. Dogs are such great companions that people just find themselves just compelled to having another companion with them if they've lost their existing companion. Dogs are faithful, yet they're often referred to us or referred by us as a pet, a PET, pet. Are we truly dog owners when we bring these sentient beings into our human homes? Are they really pets? Well, I want to ask you about that because we commonly call them pets. We call a variety of sentient beings our pets because we pet them, which is a way of giving and often receiving a lot more energy from them than we're actually giving. So when we are petting an animal, stroking its fur, looking into its eyes, that's a very human way of showing love and affection, but it's not always the way that a dog would show love and affection. So being a pet and actually petting a dog is actually more of a benefit for the human than it is for the dog. I kind of shy away from using the terminology or the word sound pet, and I'm more prone to use the word sound terminology companion or dog or canine. So I just want to point out that because humans and dogs tend to view things differently, dogs tend to live in a much more strictly hierarchical world, and that's why they're a lot more strongly pack-oriented, like Caesar and many other wonderful dog communication people that really understood dogs in the old way, in the way that they truly relate with one another and what they want in life, were able to communicate out their needs. So in the same way that people become frustrated with an inability to express themselves, imagine you're at a job and you don't really get to speak your true self. You've got to kind of put on this false persona while you're at a job. Maybe you're at a restaurant or you're a concierge at a counter at a hotel. You don't really get to be your true self and be your vivacious or comical self. You've got to really put on a little bit of a different persona while you're at work. And that's what a dog has to do when they live in a home with humans. So dogs also become equally frustrated. Living in human homes is not always easy for them. It's definitely an adaptation. So are they pets? I don't know. You might want to question that particular terminology. Everything, all is energy. Our loving attention to them, the care and feeding is one way that humans provide energy for dogs. And people relieve energy from us by our stroking their fur, by sleeping with them, and by having company when we go on walks. Dogs provide an awful lot of energy, companionship, and healing for human beings. So sometimes it's good to spend just a little bit of time to understand exactly what it is that they're looking for in their life. Well, we honestly care for dogs, but are we truly considering their nature? This is something I've given a lot of thought to for a considerable period of time. I started out with dogs in my home in 1961. And by 1966, when I was 5 years old, I was helping to groom our Chow Chow dogs, which are large, densely furred, with lots of hair, Chinese dogs that are a medium-sized dog. And you need to take a steel comb and comb all of the undergrowth and actually take the undergrowth off of the comb and put it into a big bag to do some very extensive grooming for Chow Chows. So we care for them, we feed them, we give them water, but let's look a little further into what their actual nature is. Dogs need to have a mental release. They need to be able to go outside without a collar, without shock collars, a pronged collar, nor a harness. They need some unbridled time to just set their legs free, their heart in motion, and just be a dog. But dogs living in a human home, they entrain with us, which means that their energy field is really picking up on our energy field. Human beings tend to carry a lot of mental stress in the world today. They tend to be worried about the bills or about the boss at work, maybe about their partner. Maybe they're engrossed and caught up in a lot of social media screen time. Maybe a lot of human beings today are not feeling so well and very fatigued due to poor diet. And so dogs live around us without the ability to get outside as often as they want to do, without the ability to go scavenge for their food as they want to do. So they're picking up energy, which is called entraining. That's a really nice terminology that I picked up years ago from the HeartMath folks. They pick up energy in the home as well as broadcast that's going on in the home through TV, gaming boxes, and these kinds of intense stressors all the time that would not be organic and innate to their own lifestyle can cause them to become neurotic. Anxiety, frustration, and worry in the home, raising young children, teenagers that are having behavioral problems. We sometimes bring dogs in to be a therapy dog for these children, but the dog is actually not always equipped for that, even if it has been trained by a professional to be a therapy dog. Most of the time I see some of these dogs, I see a very, very sad, stifled animal. This can lead to a dog having hemorrhoids, defecating issues in the house, destruction of property, and it can also lead to a lot of unusual behaviors that people tend to call in a behaviorist or a dog trainer because they stand out as being so unusual or atypical. Now, if we're going to understand a dog's nature, we need to understand just what is kibble. When I bring up kibble, I find that oftentimes people are really seriously unaware what kibble is. Kibble is a word for any dry, bagged dog food. If you look at the image in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see a stack of dried graham crackers. Graham crackers contain wheat, they're baked, and they really don't have any fresh, life-giving availability or benefit to them. They don't give you, enzymes or essential fatty acids or a lot of vitamins because they're very dry and baked. So any of the goodness inside of them, when they are baked at high temperatures, takes and pulls all of the nutrients out in the drying process. Kibble is pretty much the same thing. And I often will mention to my clients on dog consults, how would you feel if you woke up every morning to a bowl of dried graham crackers or a bowl of dried cereal out of a box or a bag? Even if I gave you a different kind of a cereal every couple of months and changed it up and gave you a beef and then gave you a turkey one 3 months later, you might find yourself getting kind of stale and bored, and you might start to get a lot of digestive issues because neither you nor your dog have a digestive system that's equipped to handle just eating a dry baked product all the time. So kibble is anything that is sold as dog food that is baked, dried, and put into a bag. Kibble is actually killing our companions. It is decaying the teeth, creating bad breath, creates a lot of tartar on the teeth that you see in the upper right-hand corner. And what does that do? But that leads us to the veterinarian's office, where we're often recommended that we need to have the dog undergo anesthesia and have their teeth cleaned. That's absolutely ludicrous. Unless you've adopted an animal that has a really extensive tartar problem, maybe an 8, 9, 10-year-old dog that has been living on a cheap kibble and has some really bad plaque issues that are interfering with the dog's ability to eat and digest, most of the time we're going to clean those teeth using raw, meaty bones. We're going to cover that a little bit later here. Kibble is also going to lead to and lend to obesity, cysts, cataracts, and a fatty liver. I can't tell you the number of people that I meet in the dog park that tell me that their dogs have a fatty liver disease. I can see the cyst on the bellies of the dogs, and people honestly don't know where this is coming from. They don't understand that there are alternate ways to feed their animal. There's alternate ways to take care of some of the issues that are being taken care of in the veterinarian's office through kibble, canned food, and harsh chemicals that are positioned as products for pest control, including worming, and excessive vaccinations, which are proven to be ineffective. Kibble also creates decreased longevity, and it also compromises the quality of life. Impacted colon, impacted digestion, a lot more throwing up. And when you go in the backyard, you're going to have a lot larger poops to clean up than if you're a raw or a more natural feeder. The poops are going to be smaller because your dog is going to be able to utilize more of the nutrients, which is the energy in the food, for the life-giving force benefit of the dog. Well, if you're not going to feed kibble, and most of the people that you know are buying an expensive brand of kibble, they're going to Petco or PetSmart or one of the different pet stores that we know of as chains across the United States or in other places in the world, and we certainly want to do good things for our dog. Maybe we just didn't know better. That's why I'm giving you this webinar, which will become a YouTube video. What should you feed them? Well, over 20 years ago, the BARF diet, which stands for bones and raw food, or alternatively, biologically appropriate raw food, is what dogs would have eaten. And in more recent years, people have begun to incorporate more fruits and vegetables and other aspects into the diet. Dogs can subsist on meats and organ meats and some occasional yams and starches, along with some fresh grasses and barks that they will obtain when you take them out on trails for walks, because the dog innately knows, in the same way that a female dog knows how to lay down and give birth and clean off the sack and clean up the puppies and begin nursing without a doctor getting involved, not a medicalized canine birth, the dog also knows what he or she needs to eat. And the dog needs to make sure that it has fresh meat that contains, and bones that contain raw meat on the edges of them, like on the diagram or the image here on the far right, so that will clean the teeth, so there will never be a need for you to have a professional cleaning under anesthesia, which is compromising for your dog. And if you have a young puppy, you can start off by preparing bowls like you see on the left here, some vegetables and fruits. And if your dog will still prefer them once they get past a year or two, once they've moved from being a puppy into being an adult dog, then you can continue to feed that way. If they don't, and they're only looking for the eggs and a little amount of greens and bark and meat and raw meaty bones, then you go into that, and that will work out just fine as well. So let's talk about veterinarians for a moment, because we sure appreciate veterinarians, and they provide such an awesome service for trauma care. If our dogs have had, like my dog had last Saturday, an unprovoked attack at the dog park, you want to be able to come in and get, sutures, stitches, wound care, some drugs if the dog is under extensive pain, some anti-inflammatories if it's absolutely necessary, and perhaps some vaccinations because of the state and federal laws that are mandated upon us as companions for and with our dogs. But we need to talk about the issue of sterilizing animals and providing vaccinations at far too young of an age due to current movements. Veterinarians, just like myself and just like most other companies, are a business. At 6, 7, 8 weeks old in some cases. But if you look at most of the literature, you will find that it's actually will behoove the animal's immune system to start vaccinations no sooner than 16 weeks of age. That would be after the animal or the puppy is 4 months old. You also would not give an 8-week-old puppy, as I see the majority of the time, a heavy chemicalized wormer, because pups do get worms from the mother when they're little, and we definitely want to take care of that. That's definitely an issue. But we can do that by adding diatomaceous earth or bentonite clay or Redmond clay, particularly the diatomaceous earth, into their food, which would be ground turkey, ground pork, ground hamburger, when they're very young, and giving them some raw meaty bones. And that'll take care of the majority of it, unless you're dealing with an extensive situation like a tapeworm. Then you would need to probably get a Durantal. Now, as far as the pest control, the fleas, the heartworm, the Lyme's disease, and more, fleas and Lyme's disease can also be prevented by using an essential oil on diatomaceous earth and rubbing it onto the animal's fur and skin before you go outside and into the woods if you're very concerned about ticks. If you live in an area that has a high volume of ticks, or you're going somewhere that you know that there's been a high propensity of fleas, you can use a clay. You can use a little bit of essential oil, but be very careful with that, because oftentimes dogs can be very sensitive to them. You can use a eucalyptus, a tea tree, a rosemary, a lavender, but just use a drop, 2 or 3 at the most in your hand or in the clay or glass bowl with the diatomaceous earth or the bentonite clay, the Redmond clay, and then use it on the animal, and you will notice that the fleas and the ticks have no desire to stick to the animal's fur or get on their skin at all. Now, the same thing is true for the worming, because the diatomaceous earth, if you looked at it under a microscope, has a barb to it, and it actually goes into the body and grabs a lot of the larvae and the worms and helps to expel them out through the feces. The Lyme's disease and the leptospirosis are vaccinations which, if you read the literature, you will find out do not warrant injecting the animal with those chemicals. So these are things you can easily find by looking online. The comment that I want to make on this slide is one that I've put at the bottom here in a text box. And I know that this is very counterculture to the mainstream. It's very, very counterculture. But I ask you to understand where I'm coming from. If you take a young, well puppy to the veterinarian for shots and sterilization in the first several months, these actions, if they are being recommended by veterinarians, should be criminal. We do not end the endocrine hormonal system of an infant. We don't do the same with a puppy who's less than a year old. We need to wait on that. They're not going to breed before a year anyway. Let's talk a little bit about dog trainers in this webinar. Dog trainers, unfortunately, and not all, but some, often employ harsh methods. It's a very strict, I am the master, you are the supplicant. They employ harsh methods of being pushed down to do a sit. They're often employing these harsh methods when a dog is still a baby. That'd be the equivalent of trying to force, a 1, 2, 3, or 4-year-old child to do some of the things that we just wouldn't do. We know that toddlers don't just sit down when we ask them to. We expect that developmentally they're not ready for that. And the same is true with dogs. So dogs today are trained to conform to our definition of acceptable behavior. We want them trained up like little soldiers, like little robots. Some of us would like to have the dogs just be absolutely the way we want them to be. But they are a being not unlike ourselves, that if they come up with us and they learn and move with us, they will move with you out of respect and love and allegiance. They will do what you want them to do by spending time with them, by having a predictable feeding schedule, by making sure that you let them out, by making sure that they have this mental freedom to get outside and stretch their legs and be a dog. There isn't any sentient being in the world, not yourself, not your dog, or anyone else, that desires to have a collar around their neck or to be pulled around. No one wants to be pulled around by the neck. But since we've always seen that dogs are pulled around by the neck, that's habitually become a modern acceptable stereotype. It's become a uniform code of conduct. It's what we do. And it's required, whether we go to parks, we're walking out at the lake walk, or we're walking, somewhere else where there's a lot of dogs, with the exception of a dog park. Dogs have some sort of an implement around their neck and a leash attached to their person. And we understand why we do this, but I'm just saying, even though we understand it as humans, you might not like it if you were a dog. Canine's nature. A dog's nature is simply to run, to frolic, to play, and to socialize. Humans today are truly altering a dog's nature to the point where our companions are now also feeling quite stressed and confused. Companions today are trying to conform to our ever-evolving habits, from watching the TV loudly to eating denatured kibble, and behavior which is clearly not pack-related. I see people all the time that are doing play with their dogs, but they don't realize that the dogs don't see it as play. The dogs don't see it as fun. As companions to dogs, we must provide them with a stress-free environment that's filled with love. That means tending to their needs and getting them outside where they can stretch their legs, and letting them eat their food somewhere where people aren't walking back and forth bringing out the vacuum cleaner that is very loud to a dog's sensitive ears and smell. But I've seen it over and over when I've gone to consults that a dog bowl is placed down on the ground somewhere where someone is furiously sweeping and mopping and vacuuming and opening the blinds. And you wouldn't want to eat in a very, very busy situation like that. And dogs in particular are even much more so inclined to wait and not eat their food if they're in a highly disruptive environment with loud blaring TVs. Let's talk about the dog park for a moment. As I said a moment ago, I was at the dog park, which I love to go to, and I believe that my companions love to go as well, to get out and socialize with all kinds of dogs, different shapes and sizes, and it's fun to meet and greet the people there who also love to live with their companions. But sometimes things don't work out the way we want it to. There's also a fair amount of dog park drama that goes on. And for that reason, I hear people say, I just don't go to dog parks anymore. There's a lot of drama at dog parks. I just don't want to deal with that. Or, well, we have some land and some acreage and we just choose not to go to the dog park. Well, dog parks can open up a can of worms, and that's where sometimes a little education would work out really well. Walking into the dog park, there's usually a holding gate where you're able to take your dog's leash off and then open the second gate and let your dog freely into the park. If you bring your dog into the park with a leash on, you're bringing an animal into an area where other dogs are not leashed, and it has a territory attached to you. Sometimes other dogs could register a really negative response to that, and your dog could also be extremely protective of you because of being connected with you to a territory. So dogs are very different when they're connected to the territory of being on a leash with their human being, as opposed to being off the leash. They might be a lot more easygoing. So, dogs love dog parks. They're just fun. It's really nice to observe happy, smiling dogs, especially on a sunny, beautiful day. But like I said, just be aware of dog park drama. Be aware that if you see a dog having a lot of behaviors that look like they might not be so fun later, to be sure and exit the dog park. Just go ahead and leave and come back another day. Usually this happens when people bring dogs in that are not what I call discharged, or the dogs are neurotic, the result of spending time exclusively pleasing humans. So they give off an energy into the park that can cause problems. You'll see this sometimes with someone that'll bring their dog in, and instead of the dog going and playing with all of the other dogs, they exclusively interact with their dog playing ball in a dog park. And the dog park is more so for the dogs to go and socialize with other dogs, to have dog-on-dog time. So the other flip side of that is that there can be dog breeds in the park that have a very high prey drive that also don't understand that you're playing fetch with just your dog. So understand prey drive, understand bringing the dog in so they can socialize with all the other dogs. So things you're going to need to consider when you go to the dog park. Dogs that are not sterilized, leashes in the dog park, playing ball in the dog park, and dog fights. Now I know from experience that there are several people that come in that believe that if there are other male dogs that are not sterilized, they're not neutered, that this could present a charge for their dog and could create a dog fight. And what you see when you go to the dog park is you will look to see if a male is putting his head or chin over the neck of another dog, if a male is starting to mount the dog from behind. These can be sexual behaviors on the rear mounting, but most of the time they're domination behaviors. Because dogs are constantly hypervigilant and aware of their pack order and pack mentality as a hierarchy, they are looking if another dog comes in and is intact, is not sterilized. If the dog is perhaps a raw-fed dog and has a higher functioning immune and digestive system, is not compacted with dry kibble, A dog with a strong integrity is going to give off a little bit of a different charge because, let's face it, we're electrical beings. That's why we eat food for energy. We sleep at night with the moon. We are electrical. We charge ourselves up with food and sleep and water and joy. So the same thing is true with dogs. So is it okay to say that dogs that aren't sterilized are actually causing a fight? Absolutely not. That's ludicrous. But we can say that it can produce a little bit of a charge. If a dog is having a charge like this from other animals that are not sterilized, then there's something going on behaviorally with this animal, and they just shouldn't be coming into the dog park. If your dog's having a bad day, is in a bad mood, or is feeling a lot of mental frustration, or just not getting along well, leave the dog park and go do some one-on-one play somewhere else, or go for a leashed walk around the lake. Ultimately, dogs are very special beings. And I know that that's why you would open up your home and bring dogs in and do all the loving care that you do for them, provide the veterinary care that you do, and make sure that they are safe in your cars with harnesses and dog seats and wonderful harnesses instead of collars sometimes that pull on their neck and destroy their thyroid gland. We got to think about dogs and their thyroid gland too, because when we use a collar around the neck, we're constantly impinging on the thyroid gland of the animal, especially the choked and the pronged collars. And sometimes people need to use those when they have extremely strong dogs, very large dogs, so that they keep their dog and they also keep other people's dogs really safe. So please don't ever interpret this to mean that I'm putting a negative spin on any of this. I'm certainly not. I'm just bringing up that where we have the opportunity to make other choices or educate ourselves, that we do that. So why don't we let ourselves to open our minds to what truly nourishes dogs and how we can make things work for them. And let us open our minds to using the least harmful methods for pest control, worming, skin and fur care. Let us open our minds to making sure that they get mental release and mental freedom off the leash. Let them have some time where they just run without being tethered to by a leash. I'd like you to take away these things from this webinar. Kibble is harmful, whether you spend $1,000 for a bag or you spend $10 for a bag of Purina or Olroy. The Purina dog foods are comprised of a lot of corn, and they also are comprised of a chicken or a meat type of a meal. If you look at the ingredients, you'll see chicken meal, M-E-A-L. And oftentimes, I'm not saying always, but oftentimes these animal byproducts or animal meal is something that is coming from an animal rendering plant. Now, when veterinarians euthanize dogs through inoculation, through a shot, and they are, sent off to a facility, when factory farms get rid of animals that were full of cancer and tumors or otherwise extremely sick and died on the floor, these animals and other animals that people dispose of with collars and tags and flea collars and metal identification tags, usually not removed, are put into a rendering plant, and that legally can be sold as an animal byproduct, an animal meal. And so since it is legally construed as a protein because it is ground up animals, this is what your animal could be consuming some of the time. I say could be. I know that there are brands that are very expensive, and I know that they may absolutely go to the utmost care to put vegetables and fruits and real meats, but once they are dried and baked at a high temperature and put into a bag, usually with preservatives, which are also toxic, all of the kibble is going to be harmful because it is dried, because it's compacting, and because it's unnatural, because of the ingredients. This is what's going to cause our dogs to have more cysts, fatty livers, the dry nature of all this kibble for an entire lifetime, just like if I were to feed you a bowl of graham crackers every day, would also give you cataracts on your eyes, would make you live a shorter life, and generally a more dull and lethargic life where you're fatigued, tired, because of the use of kibble. Vaccines in excess are harmful. If you're getting that card in the mail or that call from your veterinarian that says, well, it's been another year, you need to get in here for your, different vaccinations that you need, your next rabies shot, your next leptospirosis, you need a Lyme shot, you need this, you need that. Oh, and by the way, your animal's overweight, so we're going to recommend that you get onto our $3 a can food, especially for King Charles Spaniels. I see a lot of King Charles that are obese and overweight, a lot of animals that are very, very, very ADHD and high strung, because it's the equivalent of feeding our dogs fast food is to feed them kibble. And so we're going to deal with behavioral and the body, mental and emotional issues of lack of ease in their body. Bordetella is one vaccination that I personally completely avoid, in the same way I would not give myself a shot for the cold, a common cold, which is a cleansing opportunity, nor the flu. I'm not going to do the parvo nor the bordetella. Parvo is essentially the flu, and the vaccination that we have for that today is based on an over 20-year-old strain. So there's no efficacy to that whatsoever. In fact, if you want a dog to develop natural antibodies, you would receive a dog from, ideally, if you were getting a pup from a breeder, you would get from a mother who had been raw or cooked fed food with high integrity, low vaccinations, low chemical wormers, and you would get a puppy that's going to be far less likely to have all of the worms and the pest issues. But the more vaccinations, the more kibble, the more chemicals that are used, the more frontline down the spine of the animal so that those chemicals are leaching directly into the spine, through the fur and into the bloodstream, the more the integrity and the immune system of the animal is compromised. Just like with humans, we're getting a lot of immunodeficiency issues. The more propensity you're going to have for picking up ticks and things out in the wild. One of the groups that I was following and have been following is the Rabies Challenge folks, and they are working on proving the fallacy of repetitive rabies vaccinations. So if you want to Google them and find out about what they're doing, they are now compiling many years of collecting data on rabies. They actually completely got their test subjects, the dogs, all together, and they're all adopted out now after the studies have been done. And all of the empirical research will be compiled into a report and presented to the government so that we can prove the sheer lunacy of the requirement of having a rabies every 1, 2, or 3 years, depending on the state and the state laws. This over-vaccination has a terminology. It's called vaccinosis, and that's where animals develop seizures, lethargy, skin problems, itching from these vaccinations that legally we are required to give. If I was not required to give these vaccinations, I would never, ever give them, because that is what is driving our animals into seizures, incessant licking, and weaker immune systems, is the adjuvants, the propellants, and the chemicals used in these vaccines. So I'm going to open up the webinar before we close today for any questions and answers about dogs. And I'll go ahead and look over in the chat screen. If you'd like to write your question off to the right, I'll be sure and take a look at those and make a point to answer these before we close today. And if you have friends that would like to listen to this webinar, while they won't be able to ask their questions on a live basis, it'll be posted on my YouTube channel Naturally with Karen soon after the webinar is finished. Okay, I've got a question there from Liz, and she's asking, how do we give the items that I mentioned for natural worming? And what I like to use is a product called Food Grade Diatomaceous Earth, or we call it DE for short. And right on the back of the package, whether you buy the jar, food grade, or you buy the 1.5-pound bag at your health food store, you will see on the back, it'll tell you the dog's weight, and you can mix it in with the ground raw food or a cooked food. If you're going to be fixing it with a kibble for your dog, you could perhaps put a can of tuna in there to moisten it up so you could kind of disguise. It doesn't have much of a taste to it, and it's going to bring in minerals to the dog. It's going to help with parasitic cleansing, and it's going to really help to also pull some of that dried, compacted kibble through the digestive system. Okay, question from Sherry, and she's asking about how to get started with raw feeding. And what I like to do is, first of all, I usually ask my client the age of the dog. If we're dealing with a really small puppy, usually I start out by showing people how to make meatballs. And they can make really small meatballs if you've got a super tiny dog, or bigger meatballs if you have a bigger puppy. And oftentimes I will add some superfood powders like moringa or some super green powder, some flaxseed that's ground on occasion, some vegetable powders, which you can buy from the Synergy company. And I will mix those up. So there's some superfoods in there, some hemp seeds if you like. And you can make it just like you'd make a meatloaf for humans, but they would be meatballs that would be all raw. And if you're just too turned off because this is brand new to you, yes, you can cook the meatballs at first too. And then you could even freeze them. So if you were, kind of worried about the amount of time that you'd be putting in before you go to work, is you could pull those cooked meatballs out and let them thaw out the night before so they'd be ready for you the next day. So for larger dogs, if you're starting off a dog that's, not too old, if the teeth are not damaged, if it's a real older dog and the teeth are not real good, intact, then I start off with meaty pork bones, chicken legs, chicken thighs. I buy a big pack because I feed about 250 pounds worth of dog every day. I rinse them off really good. And since a lot of the chicken that's being sold in the grocery stores has been dipped in chlorine these days, I actually will do just a quick cook on my stove just to burn off some of the chlorine. So that's how I get started on the raw feeding. Okay, and I've got a question here from Brenda, and she said she feels a little bit hesitant to start off with the raw meaty bones. What I do is I go to a butcher. We have a place here in Cloquet called B&B, which is a meat market. And in one of the freezers, they have bones that they will freeze, and they sell them for, I think it's 99 cents a pound. And you can get small bones all the way up to extremely large bones. And I look for the ones that have a little bit of meat on them. And in my house, I no longer have carpet so that I can wipe things up really well. If you live in a place where it's super warm outside all the time, you might want to, offer this on the back porch so it's not so much of a mess. And if you're going to go off to work, and you've got a dog that you've already seen can handle the bones really well, it gives them something to keep their jaw busy, to keep their mind busy. It gives them something to kind of do and release out tension as a dog does using their jaw. So meaty bones are easy to get started with. And you just got to get over the fact that sometimes we are wondering that a dog might choke. Okay, I've got a question here from Jerry. And Jerry is saying that he was interested in doing raw feeding, but several times his veterinarian was very, very strictly against raw feeding and raw meaty bones. And Jerry has written out here very nicely that the veterinarian was concerned with salmonella and food poisoning issues or choking issues. And I can tell you that in over 20 years of raw and cooked feeding dogs with raw meaty bones and over 55 years of living with dogs, I have never in my life seen a dog have a problem. One thing about doing the raw food system or cooked food for your dogs is that you do need to make sure that you wipe down your counters, you keep your dog bowls clean, you keep your water bowl clean, and you keep your hands washed. And aside from that, I wouldn't have toddlers running around on the floor where I was raw feeding my dogs. I don't have toddlers on my floor, and if I did, I would exclusively feed my dogs out in the backyard. Dogs have an entirely different digestive system than we do, and the only problem you're going to have is that in the very beginning of raw feeding, if you've been feeding kibble for a couple of years, a dog could have a little bit of throw up, could have a little bit of diarrhea, in the same way a human would have if I were to start them on salads and raw and vegan food and super healthy food, and they'd been living on Wendy's and Arby's and Coke and Mountain Dew. So there would be some cleansing. The same thing is true with the dog. There could be some cleansing there too. Okay, well, this was a really fun night, this webinar on dogs, our beloved companions. And it looks like if there's no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and close for tonight. Please feel free. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and subscribe to my channel on YouTube, Naturally with Karen. Please share it with other people that you know. Show the appreciation for the work and the free webinars that are being presented for you so that you have the medicine before you. I have been working with humans and dogs reversing disease as a medicine woman with a physical business space for over 14 years in northeastern Minnesota and for a little over 15 years in California. Came from Central Coast, California, and was a native of 42 years. And I help people reverse everything from arthritis to asthma to allergies to cancer, because using our food as medicine, looking into the mind, body, and intuitive aspects, we can achieve a great amount of symptom relief all the way to reversing disease entirely, much of the time, without any promises for curing, being entirely realistic. The coaching and the guidance work is to help keep you on track, give you new ideas, and keep you focused and help you solve the little issues along the way. So instead of it being a huge issue, we tackle small issues piece by piece. I want to thank you for your time and your interest, and I'm going to say so long for now. Bye-bye.